Okay. Well, I think what happened is that it was still recording on the old call because it's already turned on. Can you hear me? You may want to check that mute thing again because I don't hear you, but I heard it say you came on.
Okay, you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Okay.
well, it says we're recording, so hopefully we are.
Okay.
So we were talking about the various openings and evolutions of your growth that I had noticed last year, and we had mentioned that you had become more sovereign in your view of yourself and your inability to control the lives of the people that you love, and the deepening of your relationship with God, and your ability to trust that the events that were outside your control were intended for the good, even if it didn't seem good, even if there was pain and suffering involved, which, especially in your mother's case, was definitely part of it.
Right.
Any other thoughts that you have?
Well, I just look back at that month. Once in a while, I'll look back either at photos in my photo album or whatever, and I look back and I just think, oh my gosh, August was just so significant. And um, from my mother to losing Sadie to just so much. And um, for some reason, I feel like, life just kind of goes by and I don't really have a record of it because I'm not really keeping a journal or anything. So I guess I could change that at this point and try and, record more of my thoughts and my processes and things like that. Um, but I also don't want to lose the moment, and I don't want to lose that part of my history of what that was like, and how um what what got me through it.
Well, as you look back now, what do you perceive did get you through it?
It was really, it was the grace of the Holy Spirit, there's no doubt.
Well, the thing is, at least in my belief, the Holy Spirit is always there, inviting us into grace. So, what did you do that gave you access to it that others might not have done? What was your part in receiving the grace? Maybe that's a better way to ask the question.
Uh-huh. See, that's what I'm not sure of. I'm not sure how it was different. I can maybe make more observations like with Sadie that than I can with my mom, because um uh, because I don't know why, but like, for example, when I knew that it was the day and she was passing, I made the call to the vet and the call to my neighbor, but I also sat there and played the harp for her. And um, I just, there was surrender. There was a lot of surrender in that moment. And um, I know, like, if I compare that to my mom on, August 8th, I know there was surrender on that day. Um, and then having her kind of come to, and feeling like, just noting her confusion and disappointment, and uh, everything that she manifested there, or showed just from her face on that day. Um, I guess it was harder for me to surrender because I didn't know what I was supposed to be surrendering to, you know? Um, it was all uncharted territory. And when my cousin said to me, this could be the new normal now. And she was totally right. It was the new normal. And just kind of like waking up one day and going, oh, this is the new normal. And then having to wake up the next day and say, oh yeah, we're in a new normal. and and so uh, that part of it was just a huge, I would say, awakening, or and it was, I guess that in itself was a surrendering, because that new normal was nothing that I could control.
Yeah, that's really what I mean about how we cope with loss. We can really focus on the way it used to be and be angry and resentful and mad at God. And you see it so much. People do this all the time. They just set themselves in opposition to the new normal because it's not what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's what God has intended with this free will that He's given us. He doesn't make us like the animals who basically live in a surrendered state. At least that's how I see it. You know, whatever happens to them happens to them,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't. I mean, for the most part, if it's get overable, they get over things. When you watch a horse grazing and something startles it or it perceives a threat, it may, charge down the field. But if they don't, in a few seconds, if they don't perceive that threat anymore, they'll just stop running and start eating right there. They're not mad that they had a good patch of grass 50 yards back and now they don't know where that was. They're just happy to be eating grass in the new patch.
Right. In the moment. Yeah.
In the moment, exactly. But humans have the opportunity to be upset about the way things used to be or the way things are now and make themselves miserable. But as we grow in consciousness and as we grow in relationship to God, um, something at this level of surrender is possible. I'm really glad you named it that. I think it's perfectly named.
Well, and that's why I don't want to be the person who looks back and does it angrily or whatever. You know, or what could I've done differently, and that's not what I'm talking about. I want to try and identify, say, the God moments or the spirit moments and celebrate them, because as they were coming along, they came along so obviously I can't name them all, but they came along so fast and furiously, and just like in the moment when I needed them, that I didn't really have time many times to celebrate it. And even though I wasn't keeping a firm diary, I mean, I would post things, messages on Facebook, you know, um, please pray for my parents, blah, blah, or, I would take certain pictures and I remember being certain places and it evokes, oh yeah, that's what I was doing on that day. Holy cow. That's what I was doing on, August 7th, right before all this happened. Interesting, that's what, because my family reunion, I think, was August 5th, and that's my mother's side of the family. And I just came across a little recording that we had all made for my mom, and the amazing thing is, she really doesn't have any memory of a whole lot of stuff from the time she came into the nursing home. Now she that was totally wiped out. It's like somebody pressed the erase button all of a sudden. It's just weird. I think that part of it, that weirdness of it, and that new normal of holy shit, can this really happen? And yeah, it is happening. That is exactly what happened. Um, that that's the part I don't want to forget, you know?
Just to make sure I'm understanding you, the part you don't want to forget is how you came to surrender when events were so clearly out of your control and not really to your liking.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, that's the part I would like to concentrate on. And I may get distracted and pulled down other roads. And if I do, that's where I need, you to kind of say to me, well, that wasn't really your priority. Can you shift and focus back onto, where was your surrender at that point, or something like that.
yeah. Well, I'll certainly be happy to do that, but I love that you're identifying the question, because now that you know what the question is, you will be able to ask yourself, you will be able to journal about it if you should choose to do it that way.
Hmm.
And more important than any of that, that's just part of the new normal now, is to always choose to align yourself with God's will. And how do we know what God's will is? Well, it has something to do with what's happening right now. Not to say that God, makes us sick or any of that, but I'm just saying that if God's allowing it and that's the way it is, that's what we have to surrender to. Back to that prayer, the surrender.
The serenity prayer.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that is such a powerful prayer, because it's so exactly the human condition, is to change the things we can change and to give up on changing the things we can't change, and to discern what those two categories are, and know that sometimes something that used to be in our control is no longer in our control, and accepting that and being willing to be at peace with it.
Right. I guess there is a part of, one of the first things you said when we first started talking was, this is such a time of loss, and how that people of our age, it just does seem that there's just loss everywhere, and there's a part of me that doesn't want to bang my head on the wall about it, but how, when that the loss is imminent, like I said to Gerard the other day, I know where all this is headed. I go, I make the trips, I sign the papers, I file the insurance, and try and make the best decisions about estate plan, estate issues, and just all those things. But I know where it's headed, and it's like, you're just getting ready to drive off a cliff. And sometimes that's really hard to think about it that way. So there's this anticipatory grief that I feel, and I feel like it's valid, and I don't want to just push it under the rug. Um, it's not hitting me as a panic like it would have maybe in the past. So I think I've evolved to a point where I can talk about it and not get totally emotionally sucked into it, but it's real.
Yeah. Well, that's an excellent point. I mean, the truth is, the day you were born, we knew where this was headed.
Yeah.
We just have the luxury of not thinking about it or not focusing on it when circumstances are in a certain range, and then circumstances shift into a range where you don't know if it's today or tomorrow or next year or a couple years, but you'd know for sure it's not 90 years,
Mm-hmm.
not 50 years. It's highly unlikely that it's 10 years, so it's interesting how, on the one hand, human beings are so attached to certainty and knowing things. And on the other hand, part of the reason that I think we can live in joy is because we do live in a certain amount of uncertainty. I mean, if you knew that your mother would die tomorrow, you would probably make different choices about how to spend your time today.
Right.
You knew your mother was going to live 10 more years, you would probably make different choices about how to spend your time today. But the way that it is, we don't know who's going to make it through the night. But we can't really live on the edge of that abyss, so we have to live in the celebration of life that's available today. Today you're not in the town where they are, and today you are near your new puppy, and you are near your husband, and you are near your friends, and any sort of natural, maybe park environment that you find joy in. And so today's options for joy are a certain subset of the whole of your whole life experience. And the days that you're with your parents, hopefully you're not feeling a lot of regret or doubt about whether you should be where you are. You're just really with them when you're with them, and you're home when you're home. And that kind of present moment living is where the joy is really the most accessible.
Right. So maybe when the anticipatory grief hits, it's not so much that I'm pushing it under the rug, but I just kind of acknowledge it and say, oh yeah, that's that. There you are again. So how are we going to get through the rest of this day together?
Yeah. Well, finding these questions will direct what you're focused on. So you notice this grief come up and you honor it. Yeah, I realize the day is coming that I will have to say goodbye to my mom and my dad. And I know that that will be a difficult day, but today is not that day. How do I want to guard my joy, trusting that God is in control of all of our lives, and accepting that even though their physical presence will at some point be gone, they are not going anywhere. They're forever in the mind of God, and so do I, and I can celebrate that. And I can do anything that I can see to do today to make that a more real experience of my relationship with them than those bags of skin and bones that are living in that assisted care place. Does that make sense to you?
It does. There was just one thing that I'm trying to think. Something came into my mind while you were saying all that, and oh, I know what it was. It was yeah, it was about boundaries, but it was about boundaries with grief. Like grief being almost like another entity or person or being that, you know, it's there. It's there. It's real. It's justified. Um, but creating a boundary with it and saying, okay, yep, you're here. But you're not going to rule this day. This is this is not your day to take over.
I really like how you're saying that. That's not denying anything, but that is affirming your right to choose where you're going to place your focus.
There's a song. There's a Christian song. It's called the Breakup Song. Have you heard it? And it's about fear. And she's breaking up with fear. I'll see if I can find it and I'll send you a link to it. But anyway, Yeah, basically it's, you're not welcome here today. I understand, that you're here, fear, but you're not welcome here today. And so I'm breaking up with you. And it's kind of the same sort of uh, intention I'm feeling like, well, not really saying advice that you're giving, but just kind of the message that you're trying to, help me see is that, being in the present moment, um, if you're trying to be in the present moment, then it really is not helpful to be stuck in anticipatory grief, but you have to realize that it's there. So, what tools or strategies, can you cope with it by, from day to day.
Exactly. I think that when we have this intimate relationship with God and we acknowledge that God intends for us to enjoy our lives, that begins to point toward how God invites us to keep our focus. There's that line, is it in Proverbs? Whatever is lovely and worthy of praise, let us dwell on these things.
Right.
I think that God is saying to us, you can't control your life or anyone else's life. And I invite you to relax into that and focus on what will allow you to enjoy this day that the Lord has made. It's just a real different idea than how we get used to living. It was such a powerful sermon at Elevation last Sunday, and it wasn't Pastor Furtick that preached it. They were talking about the Tower of Babel and how these wandering people had come into this place and they wanted to build this tower and they wanted to have this community. And there's really nothing wrong with the human desire to feel safe and to feel that you belong and to feel that you have some security. And the pastor was saying that when in the past, when he read that passage, God comes in and he says, the people are settling here. I forget the exact way he said it, but he gave these individuals different languages so that they couldn't communicate with one another. And when they couldn't communicate, they went their separate ways and they scattered. And the pastor was saying it's easy to perceive that God punished them, but he said that what God had taught him in studying the passage was that it wasn't a punishment, that he was giving them a second chance to do what he had always intended, which was to scatter this tribe to the four winds,
Mm-hmm.
to spread his message over the face of the earth. And I just found so much something to really hold on to there, that as much as we desire the experience of safety and security and belonging and sameness, God's plan exists on a domain beyond that, and God invites us to have those things, safety, security, belonging, in our relationship with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can float on the like the waves of the ocean of circumstance without all this fear. There's that passage where Jesus and the disciples are in the little boat and Jesus is having a nap and the wind comes up and they're all terrified, we're going to perish in this storm, and Jesus is just sleeping. Why was Jesus sleeping in the midst of this terrible storm? Well, he wasn't afraid. He had complete trust and faith that everything was fine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the example. I don't know that humans can maybe totally embody that, but when we set our mind to the process of focusing on what's enjoyable about right now, where I am right now, how it is right now, and if circumstances are truly not to our liking, what second chance could God be trying to give me by by allowing me to walk into this mess. Th- to me, that's just, I mean, I don't know as a young woman if I could have even had the strength to do this, but after 60 years on this planet, uh, having beaten my head against many walls because they weren't how I wanted things to be, now that just seems like a much more doable option to just say, yes, I
Hmm.
surrender to how it is today. I'm not, I appreciate that I'm aware that my parents are leaving, but they're not gone today. Why,
Right.
why would I spend today's joy grieving for my parents when they're still alive? What could be my agenda for doing that? And if you do find that occurring someday, I invite you to just explore that. Why? What is the benefit if I choose to leave my focus here and amplify this grief and amplify this sadness and exacerbate feelings of depression? What would be my purpose in that?
Hmm.
Because I'm presuming you're with me that you can see that it's probably not God's best for you to spend your day that way.
Right.
So we can't really put it off on God. Whatever else we do with those feelings, it's not God's fault if we choose to focus our minds that way. And another way that I cope with it, Vicky, that's probably I think a good option for you is to really literally just start watching my breath and tune into my heart space.
Hmm.
All that other stuff, anticipatory grief, that's really in your mind.
Hmm.
It's
Absolutely. Yeah.
not in your heart. And
Right. And
what
I think it came up to me, more in my face this past week because one of my neighbors whose mother was in the facility when my dad went in there, and so um, they were present at the nursing home a good deal when I was there, at least at first. Her mother just died this past week, and she was a neighbor. And I'm seeing posts on Facebook and everything, and I'm just thinking, yep, this is going to be me at some point. It's going to be how it's going to go. I mean, she still has her dad, is still alive, but there's a lot of similarities. We grew up on the same block, and so it's what would be my purpose in spending my time there? Well, I guess there was a part of me, when I was a younger woman, where I would rehearse every possibility that there was, and I would think, if this happened, this is how I'd react. If that happened, this is how I'd react. I literally would. I would go through all the possibilities, at least the way I saw them, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's a really astute observation. And I think there is a part of us, especially the mind part of us, that thinks that we can kind of rehearse and get prepared. And I'm pretty sure that your life experience has already taught you that as much as you tried to prepare for something, that the reality was really just a step beyond when it wasn't so. Like the moment that your mother dies and all the moments prior to her while she's alive, the moment when your mother's gone, like when my father died, uh, well, that's not a great example because of all those circumstances. I actually felt happy for my dad that his suffering was over,
Hmm.
and it took a long time before I felt any grief because my focus during that time was being happy for him that the misery that he had been living in was ended, and
Right.
he was with God. So you might even consider that as much as there's a part of you that will lose the pleasure of your mother's physical presence, there will be a part of you, possibly, that can be happy for her that she's no longer trapped in that body that must be just such a nightmare to live in.
Right. Yeah, I think what you're pointing to is that you really don't know how you actually are going to feel in that moment.
You don't. And it's not like there's one feeling. It's like there'll be a succession of moments, and some of them you'll feel relieved, and some of them you'll feel loss, and some of them you'll feel grief, and some of them, perhaps, when you think about her being reunited with her family and those that have gone before, there might be even a part of you that celebrates.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the day that you saw your ancestors down in the basement of your home. And there wasn't any grief in that moment, was there?
No, and there wasn't any grief when I could sense them on the day that my mother was almost passing. So, there was a sense of peace actually, and affirmation, that we're here waiting. So, um, I mean, that was the clear message, was we are here, you know.
So maybe you can see even now that it's appropriate to have feelings of celebration.
Hmm.
Mother died. Is that right, or am I putting words in?
No, that's right. And I'm thinking about it, not just my mother, I'm thinking about my dad too.
For sure. You know that that baby that you lost is there too.
Right. And I have, well, at some point, um, I need to talk about my daughter actually making connection with that baby recently. It's wild. She's never ever talked about feeling lost or anything. She always said, I didn't ever want any baby sister or brother. So I, I was just as happy to be an only child. And she's totally honest about that. But she had some experience recently where she was feeling the like the essence of who we call baby Julia, and it was pretty cool when she shared it with me.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's one of the big gifts that Heinz's death gave me is the awareness that I don't have to claim my physical reality as my only reality.
Hmm.
That's weird to say because I've always had a concept of heaven, and I'm pointing to something else, like I guess for me, and I'm not trying to say that this is how you perceive it, but to me, heaven was sort of an up in the sky somewhere else place.
Hmm.
And since Heinz died, I have a different sense that it's right here, right now.
Hmm.
I just mostly I choose not to tune into it. But when you saw your ancestors on those several occasions, you didn't go anywhere and they didn't come to you. They're right here, right now. We just it's a little too boggling to the brain. But there are people that do every time they go anywhere. They see dead people and hear dead people, and
Hmm.
so if I think that any of us that really want to kind of put one foot into that reality, there's nothing stopping us other than our own sense of comfort or our own feelings of fear. But there's only one place. We're all living in the mind of God already. It's just that, like it says in the Bible, that it's a mansion with many rooms, and mostly we perceive the earth rooms as different than the other rooms. But the older I get, the more that love's eternal presence opens itself up to me, the more I see there's only one mansion and we're all living in it already and we always will, and we never were anywhere else.
Mhm.
And I just personally for me I find my ability to abide there is where I can begin to live in that feeling of unconditional love where I don't feel called necessarily to judge every circumstance anymore. This need to say that's good and that's bad and that's good and that's good and no, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad. No, this, you know, that isn't a happy way
Yeah.
to be constantly evaluating life in terms of my preferences. A happier way is to think I'm safe in the mind of God now and forever. And if there's a disconnect between me and my experience of my physical body, that's okay because I'm not really going to go anywhere. I'm just going to see the different rooms in the mansion. I'm going to perceive it differently.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I like that image of the mansion. I can remember hearing um, a funeral sermon about a much beloved community member in Maine, and that was one of the scriptures that the pastor gave, and uh, and the part of I think the next sentence after "in my father's house there are many mansions" is, "If it were not so, wouldn't I have told you?" You know, and um, so we haven't been told any different than that, uh, and yet we kind of walk around like you said, n- not allowing that possibility to exist. And as you were saying about not judging things, that is just so hard because we are honed from childhood, infanthood. This is good, this is bad, and so to let that go is really difficult.
It's a super challenge. Our brains are wired for it.
Hmm.
But as you do embrace the idea that of consciousness, it becomes much less about the way it's always been and becomes much more about how do you want it to be. When you realize that there are many mansions and there are many rooms and it's all living in the mind of God, that's a whole different playground than I'm stuck over here in this
It's 3 o'clock.
isolated bag of bones uh, with no options.
Mm-hmm. And that helps me a lot in thinking about, if I do pursue this, going back and trying to, retroactively journal this significance of this past year, um, to help me see, uh, I'm not sure what I was going with that, with the direct object of that sentence was. I think the clock threw me off. Um,
No, I should remember to turn that off when I work with someone, but I never do.
um, but I guess in frame of reference, and the in God's eye, God, the how did you put it, the mind of God's eye or something like that.
Yeah,
Hmm. um,
we all live in the mind of God.
right.
And this idea that we live in a separated bag of skin and bones is that's just our perception. That's how
Oh, and okay, and that I was where I was going with that was, the judgmental part of this is good and this is bad, looking back and trying to remove that judgment part, trying, and as soon as that judgment part comes up, just say to myself, that's a red flag. That's one of those places you don't want to go, you know, of the good and bad. Let's take that away.
exactly. because it presumes so much that isn't true. I've kind of, I've always been a person that wanted to end suffering. I got into all the work that I've ever done has been to try to alleviate the suffering of myself and other people. And I've just come into a realization that this world of contrast has a definite purpose, but that when it doesn't begin to serve us anymore, there's a way of living that doesn't really honor the perception that gives rise to the judgment of good and bad or light and dark. And it's much more focused on how can I expand into God's perception of this moment,
Mm-hmm.
where it's unconditionally loving, where there is no judgment, where there is no saying that even though someone I love is in pain, that that's a bad thing. And I mean, that's the ultimate surrender. Like, I think 2 weeks ago, Pastor Furtick preached on that the passage, I think it's in Matthew, that Jesus endured the cross because he set his eyes on a greater joy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the invitation to us. If we do get into these situations that are not what we would prefer, to ask ourselves, how can I step into the greater joy from here? And to ask for help from God when we need that, because oftentimes we do.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter's been having a real challenge with being a single mom lately, and I want to ease her suffering, and I try, but oftentimes uh, it's just inappropriate, because even though she's not particularly happy with this circumstance, I see that it's teaching her valuable things.
Mm-hmm.
And if I would let go of the judgment that it's bad when she's suffering, I could celebrate the progress that she's making a lot easier, because she is making a lot of progress. She's just not having a lot of fun in the process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's harder with our own child because, we'd rather do anything, we'd catch the bullet for them so that they don't have to feel it. So,
I agree. I've totally lived like that, and I see how inappropriate it is, especially for children, because if they have a small suffering that teaches them something, goodness only knows what bigger suffering might be avoided.
mm-hmm.
And this desire to protect them from all these things it's just a way of not trusting God. It's a way of saying, this is my child, not God's child. I,
Mm-hmm.
I know better than God what's good for her. I mean, you can hear the the pride and the arrogance in that. It's just crazy,
Yeah.
crazy talk. And yet it kind of passes in the social media world for that. Good moms are like that. They make sure their children never fall down or never skin their knee or never learn a hard lesson. That's what a
Mm-hmm.
parent does. Well, that's crazy.
Yep.
You can raise a totally spoiled brat of a person if you don't let them learn any lessons when they're young.
Look at our president, for example. No, sorry. Did I go there? Did I say that out loud?
Well, he is a great teaching tool, no matter what side of the fence you fall down on.
Yes.
I had a relative posting on Facebook about how they want this wall. And I don't, I try to keep my nose a little clean from all of that, because it's just so hard to understand, and I don't have time to try to figure out how people see things. But this wall business is just,
Well, and it must be totally in your face in your state, because it's there. That's where they're talking about. So
I know.
it can be pretty vague and abstract to the rest of us. Well, especially in like in Maine, bordering right up against Canada for the most part, it just seems it seems totally absurd. You know, you don't hear people in Maine saying that. And there are other states that border Canada, you know, the same way, and you don't hear people talking that way, but you know, it's it's just very specific to your state. So,
Well, that's an excellent point. That's a really good point. I don't, I don't know. But I do see that no matter what side of the Trump argument you're on, he's been a very effective catalyst for conversation. Not necessarily good communication, I'm not saying that, but
mhm.
people sure do get riled up. You should hear my mother when she gets on the Trump thing.
Oh my gosh. So she's not a fan, huh?
She is not a fan, and my mother is pretty mild-mannered, so for her to get this riled up about somebody,
Yeah.
it has to be a pretty extreme circumstance, but boy,
Uh-huh. Wow.
and it's amusing to me. When it doesn't getting on my nerves, I will admit to sometimes like I don't want to hear this again.
Mhm. Oh man.
So does that help at all with this desire that you have to make sense of last year and mine the value of it?
Yes, it does.
Are there any other places in that last year or so that we should visit together so that you can move forward with whatever you're wanting to do with this? I mean, we don't have to be finished today either. We can
Yeah.
pick it up again.
Well, yeah, I mean, I will think about that because they'll definitely pop out at me, you know, when I'm kind of just perusing my, you know, what passes for my journal, which is my camera and my Facebook messages and posts. So,
Well, I think I feel moved to add in that you can trust yourself in this coming year. We don't know what's going to happen, but I think that in the time that I've known you, you have gone from being a person who was really ruled by fear and anxiety to being a much more centered, grounded, efficient, effective woman. Is that your perception of yourself?
yeah, oh yeah. Definitely, you know, accurate in that I was ruled by fear and anxiety. You know, I don't know how far on the, you know, effective, efficient I am, um, but I appreciate that as a, you know, as an observation from your point.
Well, your standards are pretty high, in my opinion, given what you have coped with, and if all that happened last year had happened the year I met you, I don't think that you could have done 10% even of what you did this past year.
Hmm.
Do you?
No, no.
I think it would have been pretty debilitating. I mean, maybe you would have risen to the occasion because of your position and not really having much choice, but I don't think you could have done it with the amount of grace and compassion and self-care that you did do it with. I'm really very impressed. It's quite inspiring to me.
Well, I just want to keep the self care up there, because I feel like the holidays just really, you know, suck me dry, um, because I, you know, do a lot of planning for traveling and gift giving and, you know, this and that. Um, and this holiday was, you know, no different in that way. Um, and so when I get done, I kind of feel like just drained, you know, and then I realize, oh yeah, it has been over a month, maybe two, since my last massage, for example. You know, um, going for a hair, perm and not perm, color and a cut on Friday. It's been a couple months, and just all the things that are, those small self-care gestures for myself, let alone the health, taking my health seriously, so I've had I'm going to go have an eye exam on Thursday, paying out of pocket for that because I'm having it at a doctor where I really trust. I haven't found Gerard's had several eye doctor appointments here, and I don't feel comfortable at any of the places he's gone. So, um, but I do feel comfortable in my hometown at the place where I've taken my folks. So that's where I'm going. And if they find things that I need to have besides just, you know, a new prescription for lenses or something, well, then I'll have to make some decisions there. But the, as to whether to keep going there or try and find somebody closer here that's in my insurance loop. But anyway, just all of that being said, I'm just trying to get back into some self-care because I know I left it slip, from about the time I think last time I talked to you was at the end, around the end of October. So,
Well, that might be an area for some fruitful list making of what are the major choices that you made that didn't consider your own needs. I think that you
mhm,
find some real jewels out of that exploration,
mhm,
because it's always about the choices that we make. And if you take the time to identify, well, okay, I thought I only had three options here, but actually I had four or five, and four and five, either one of those would have left me feeling more vital and nourished than one, two, or three that I did choose. Does that make sense?
mhm. Yeah.
So you can just expand your own perception of what the options were. And the benefit of doing that would be the next time these choices come up, maybe your visual field would already include five options instead of just three.
Right. Well, or just to get a little bit out of the realm of habit, because a lot of the options just spring from habit.
Well, good point. Yeah. The whole trick about self-care is to build it into your life like a habit, and then that your perceptual field always includes it.
Mhm.
Whereas now, clearly, there are times that it drops out of the field of consideration altogether, and that's okay. But like you're saying, it'd be nice if next Christmas was 10 or 15% less stressful and 10 or 15% more enjoyable. That would be great. And there's
Mhm.
a way to do that. And that's to make some different choices. Not to say that you made any bad choices, but just saying there might be even better choices than the ones you made.
Right.
But you're not likely to choose them unless you identify in advance that they're out there available. And that's what conscious living is, or mindful living.
Mhm.
We we go beyond what immediately presents itself into territory that's expanded, and where our greatest joy lives is in that expanded territory. Also, I'm kind of wondering what you might want to be creating for yourself this year. So when the time is right, that might be something to do some journaling about, instead of having a life that's more dependent on what happens with your parents. Owning the opportunity to create something for yourself that you'd really like to have at the end of the year that you don't have right now.
Mhm. Yeah, and that just has seemed so far out of my reach, for the last few years that I haven't even approached anything like that.
Yeah, well, and maybe you'll feel like you don't want to, that there would be too much stress involved, but I think that even if it's just small things, that it's worth it from my perspective. That's all I can say is it's worth it from my perspective to own the time of this year as yours to apportion in the way that makes you the most joyful,
Hmm.
considering that God's plan for your life is that you live in joy.
Yeah, that's helpful. That is very helpful.
It's not to say that anything would be set in stone, that if the need arose, you couldn't consciously choose to put something on a parking lot and take care of something unexpected that came into your path. But it is your year, it is your life, and it will go by.
Right.
Like last year, it'll be gone by pretty darn quick.
Well, and that's the way I've sort of felt about January, is that, it's just, I had this conscious feeling of, like, around New Year's, that I didn't want life to just go by. And now, like, up until when I had called you, or, messaged you or emailed you to make this appointment, that's sort of the way I felt January was going. It's like, ugh, this is not okay. This is not what I have in mind. So,
Good for you for noticing that and taking some action, because I don't think that we can really slow time down. From what I can see, everyone feels it and it's not going to slow down. So the question is, how can we guide the ship in fulfilling and joyful ways without slowing it down?
hmm.
I think that's our only option, is to find some joy in the speed. When we say this too shall pass, it's going to pass faster than it used to. But if we're not inserting our intention into that stream, then we just will live a reactive life in 2019.
Hmm.
Did you see the blood moon the other night?
No, I didn't. We were too busy watching the football games on TV.
Ah,
And my neighbor told me about the blood moon, though, and she messaged me in the morning. She actually messaged me that night, but for some reason I didn't get the message, because she said go outside and look at the moon. Well, I didn't get it until the next day, but I guess we could see it here quite well.
well, it was a massive energetic reset, and there's just no doubt about it. I went outside at 11:30 my time, and
Hmm.
it was this ball of red in the sky, and it just has an impact, and it has an impact whether we saw it with our physical eyes or not.
Right. Well, I've seen lots of pictures of it. So,
Yeah, it was a major reset. So the opportunity is to really let go of old habitual ways of living that are not expanding your joy, and to focus into to whatever ways you feel called, especially the callings of your heart. It's not so much about pleasure. There's a real distinction between pleasure and joy, and certainly the two can go hand in hand, but they don't necessarily have to.
hmm.
That was one thing I got out of that verse in Matthew, was Jesus endured quite a bit of suffering because he saw the joy that was the greater good. So I'm kind of talking about that sort of joy, not the, oh goody, it's chocolate cake for dessert kind of joy.
Well, the chocolate cake's pretty good. You got to admit.
I'd admit, yeah, and that's, we can put that in, but if we put it too much in, then there could be health consequences.
That's
So
right.
sometimes the greater joy is celery juice.
Uh,
I don't know if you've heard about the celery juice deal, but
I haven't.
well, apparently celery juice has electrolytes and enzymes and stuff beyond what's really been recognized by the traditional medical community, but
Hmm.
um, people are having miraculous results with juicing celery and drinking the juice every day. It's a liver tonic, and it just does amazing things. So,
No. Have you tried it?
oh yeah, I've been juicing celery, and if you eat celery at all, you know that sometimes it's very tasty and sometimes it's kind of bitter. So
Mm-hmm.
the juice can range anywhere from, oh, I can drink this, to, oh gosh, hold my nose and just get it down. Some days it's not enjoyable at all. And I don't
Uh-huh.
drink it every day, but I was pretty convinced that it was something to add into the health process.
No, I'll have to look into it. No, I hadn't heard about that.
Well, if you go to YouTube and put celery juice in the YouTube search, you'll see some what people are saying about it.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking if we, give me a couple weeks here and try and set something up for in a couple weeks. That'll give me some time to go through and, you know, like I said, look at some of my um, past posts and photos and things like that and get some ideas going.
Okay. Well,
Um,
you have very, I don't know if I mentioned this. It seemed like I told you, but I got a new phone and I haven't connected it to Facebook for
okay.
privacy reasons. So email is the most efficient way to reach me right now. I will see a Facebook message, but not necessarily the day you send it, because I just don't presence myself on Facebook the way that I did for a while. And that
Okay.
I may change that back, but Facebook offended me with some of their privacy violations, and so I've been in protest.
Hmm.
Not that it's made any difference to anybody but me, but I just
Yeah.
needed to do something to feel like I was honoring my boundaries, and I just think Facebook has gone too far, but there's nothing much you can do because it's also just such a great way to be in touch with people. So
Hmm.
I'll probably have to let go of my righteous indignation here in a while. But for the moment, I'm protesting.
Oh my God. Have you seen the movie Brexit yet?
No.
BRE. Oh, you'll have some righteous indignation, I think, when you get done with that. And well, just kind of um, like confirmations of what people would say would be conspiracy theory, but um, having to do with like data breaches and things like that. Um, yeah, you got to check it out. Benedict Cumberbatch, is that his name? He plays one of the lead roles, um,
Well, that
and
sounds really good.
and yeah, he's like I just watched it last night, um, and you got to watch it to the very end and watch the like the little comments, the typed out comments at the very end too, because that will send you on another path of thought about how all of our information is really not private at all. So
Yeah. Where did you access it? Is it
I
on?
saw it was on HBO.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I don't know where you could. I don't think it's an HBO movie. It actually came from. I think it was made in England, and yeah, just Google Brexit the movie, and you'll find some details on it.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Hmm.
Well, anything else before we wrap up today?
I don't think so. It's just good to be back in touch, and I appreciate you picking me right back up where we left off. So,
Yeah, I feel deep sense of connection. And when we started talking about the past year, it just kind of allowed me to gather my thoughts around our work, and I feel really good about it. I have
um,
some friends in my new women's Bible study group, and their mothers are both dementia patients, and it is just heartbreaking, and but somewhat comforting to know how many of us are going through things like that. And um, it's just a real sign of our times that we can keep people's bodies going longer than we can keep their minds clear, and
mm-hmm, absolutely.
giving that over to God, because there's nothing much else to do about it. Okay, well, I'll wait to hear from you to make our next appointment, and if this works for you, we'll continue um,
On Zoom.
on Zoom.
Okay. All right. That sounds good.
Okay, Vicki, much love.
Thanks. Back at you.
Bye
Bye
for
bye.
now.